All right, well, welcome to Farmers Market class. My name is Drew Lee. I'm a certified master gardener here in Rutherford County. I work at a local nursery, the name is South Branch Nursery. You've probably been there. I know several of you have. And then we'll be talking about permaculture. Kind of the ins and outs of it. It's a pretty wide, deep subject. I'm only really going to focus on a portion of it though, as we take and move through. And first thing I'd like to bring your attention to is the picture up here. You can't see it right there, but it's this one right here. That's the picture from the original Permaculture 1 book. It was done by an artist in Australia, and it's got several things in there that are very representative of what permaculture tries to do. And a little bit of symbolism, because the snake with the rainbow on there is a little reminiscent of the rainbow serpent common in Australian folklore and mythos. And it's a creature that not only produces change, but it also creates. It's making an infinity symbol because permaculture is supposed to be permanent. And it showcases how things are tied together with each of the scenes in it along with the soil, and it kind of wrapping back in on itself. So I'll take it. So what I'm covering, I'm going to try to just familiarize you with the concepts of permaculture. That way you can be prepped for any further research that you might want to do. We provide you with some tools that you can use in your own gardens to start moving towards what permaculture is. So I'm going to wind up covering what it is, just a good definition, the ethics and basic principles of permaculture, because that's what kind of guides you through as you're making all these design choices and decisions. System development, because permaculture is a system, and it is a system that makes use of systems. So it's compounding. It's almost like manufacturing, but without all the tedious work. There's a lot of conceptual techniques that I'm going to be covering, and there's several tools that I'm going to show you for implementation. And I need to point this out because I'm still learning. Everyone in permaculture is always learning. There's a lot of information here, and I'm just trying to share a portion of it with you. So what is permaculture? Permaculture was created by two guys in Australia, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. Bill Mollison was serving as a teacher, a professor at one of the colleges down there. Holmgren was one of his students. They put it together in 1978, way back when. And it originally started out as being permanent agriculture, so a portmanteau of those two words, kind of just combined together. It was thought process to take and combine plant systems and animal systems, land use, all that stuff together so they feed into each other and keep each other maintained, which is a much better system than we currently use in agriculture, where we throw a lot of inputs in and just get out a few outputs. We just kind of rotate through that. Now a lot of stuff feeds back into the system. Eventually, they came up with the cross-thought idea that permaculture also needs to be permanent culture, because to get to a point where you are no longer going through and spraying chemicals on everything, or being dependent on importing fertilizer into an area, you have to have a cultural change. Because it's a lot of thought processing that you have to sort of reevaluate and shift out of into a new paradigm. And it also covers a lot of other things, because as you start trying to deal with making systems self-contained, you start having to deal with the architecture of the area. You start having to deal with the economics, because that's always a pressure on your systems. Legal issues, I mean, sometimes you want to do this in neighborhoods, and you have HOAs and local ordinances that can cause you problems. So that's another outside issue on your system. Ethics and principles to keep everything where you're not causing more problems than what you're trying to solve. Bill Mollison, one of his quotes, "Permaculture uses the inherent qualities of plants and animals combined with the natural characteristics of landscapes and structures to produce a life-supporting system for city and country using the smallest practical area." So we're using everything to work on everything. So then, what is it? Jack Spirko has a wonderful little description for it. A system design driven by a prime directive and 3 ethics that draws from the methodology of natural systems to create solutions that form self-replicating, evolving, and infinitely sustainable systems. So what's his prime directive that he talks about? The only ethical decision is to take responsibility for ourselves and our children, because a lot of permaculture is tied up in ethics and doing things in particular ways. And it gives us the foundation for it. So in permaculture, we take responsibility for ourselves. Make sure that we're doing everything we can to be the best people with land use that we can be. That way we're not making things worse. And the 3 ethics that it's talking about are care of the earth, care of the people, and then a funny little one that started out as set limits to population consumption. So care of the earth means we're not trying to destroy the earth. We're trying to at least leave it like it was and hopefully make it better. So if we need metal, we're trying to recycle instead of going and mining more out. If we have a pest issue, we try a predatory species first instead of putting down chemicals to kill them out. If we have a weed that's constantly coming up into space, we try to figure out what we can put there to get rid of the weed instead of hitting it with herbicides. Or maybe we take and figure out, hey, I have goats. They like eating kudzu. And we bring the goats in to eat kudzu. Care of the people means you take care of yourself and others, that you should always be striving to make sure that people are cared for. That simply means that you're not being a pain in the butt to somebody. You're being the nicest person you can. You're trying to help them out by teaching people things and showcasing what can be done with an area. You do your level best just to make sure that other people know what they can do to take care of themselves, and that if they need help, you can help them. It's like old barn raisings, a community coming together to take care of each other, to get storage put together for the next year and for a long time after, up to like communal farming. And then the set limits to population and consumption. Whenever they were putting this together back in the 70s, that was the height of doom and gloom, oil shortages, gas shortages, and rationing. Lots of things were looking like they were going down the tubes. Unfortunately, we are today. Us, industrial agriculture has managed to keep up with production so far. But eventually, Mollison figured out that this may have had some issues with some people understanding it, so he shifted it to return a surplus. So that means that whenever you get something out of the system, you have a lot of it. Some of that you may use for yourself, some of that you may use for others, but a lot of it will go to the ground. And that surplus comes from a lot of places. Let's say you have rabbits. Okay, rabbits make more rabbits, so that can be a surplus. Rabbits make manure, so that can be a surplus. Rabbits make fur, that can be a surplus. Rabbits are cute, they make people happy when they pet them, that can be a surplus. And then you had David Holmgren and some other folks who liked him because he was definitely of the two the more earthy. And people also like onomatopoeia. So eventually, care of the earth turned into Earthcare, care of people turned into people care, and then to finish off the rhyme, fair share. So that has a lot of connotations that winds up making people think about communism and socialism and stuff. This has caused some problems in the permaculture community because a lot of things can be done for bad reasons. Whenever you start thinking about spreading out all the wealth, sometimes you wind up with people doing things that don't take care of the people so well and don't take care of the earth so well. Then, most recent book that Bill put out back in the mid-90s, it was Fair Share, Set Limits, and Redistribute Surplus. So figure out what your maximums are, and then the rest of it you take and you deal with. And that's sort of like standard inventory control and sales and just storage of food and whatnot. Figure out what you need. Keep that, keep your systems running, keep yourself fed, keep everything taken care of. And then the rest of it you take and have surplus to it with what you need or what you want, or to give some out. And then return, not redistribution of surplus, to kind of finish that out. And then my personal favorite, care of the future. So doing everything to take care of the future, so making sure you have some put away. Be the ant instead of the grasshopper. Work to take and put stuff together for winter, that way you're well fed. So design principles. These are the conceptual foundation of permaculture. They're derived from the science of systems ecology. They're the study of pre-industrial examples of agriculture and land use. Permaculture draws from several disciplines: organic farming, agroforestry, integrated farming, sustainable development, applied ecology. It is a multifaceted way of looking at things. And all of these things and these design principles, they spiral out from the personal to the local to the regional to country and to the globe. So they start with you because you can affect the most stuff in your life, and then it starts populating out as you kind of spread that information out and kind of grow out. So what are these design principles? There's 12 of them. I'll just kind of go through them real quickly. They're observe and interact. In permaculture, the most important thing that you can do is observe your environment and figure out what needs to happen in it. Because careful observation leads you to the solutions that you need. Catch and store energy. If you can get inputs on your own property for your use, that means you don't have to bring them in from anywhere else. And sometimes you can store them and keep them there. The most common thing in permaculture for that capture and storage of energy is water. Because if you can keep water on your land, you cut a lot of problems in half, and that water can help you develop other things that you need for energy storage. And then this can populate out to other things like solar or wind power, or taking and growing wood for wood heat. Obtain a yield, so you always want to be able to try to get something off of what you're doing. So that means your first steps in permaculture are doing a little 4x4 vegetable garden. Go for it, you are now walking down the path. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So know your limits, have a good idea of the limits of your system, and whenever something happens, take that into consideration. So let's say you plant out some lettuce in late April, and all of a sudden it gets hot. You know next year maybe if it's going to do that again, you should probably take and plant varieties that are heat tolerant, that are slower to bolt, or maybe in that time frame you plant something else besides lettuce. You put in maybe a kale that's a little bit more heat tolerant, or you swap over to some leaf greens, or maybe you encourage the dandelions to grow in a little bit more because you can eat their leaves and they're more drought tolerant. Use and value renewable energy. That one's just make sure that you're conserving as much from the environment as possible to make use of. Produce no waste. So anytime you have something come out of your system, you're trying to take and feed it back into the system. That way it can be used elsewhere. Design from patterns to details. That's a very convoluted little statement, but essentially what it means is that in nature, things always happen in a sequence or in a set. They'll occur together. So we'll have a pattern. So you take that pattern and then you use it to work out the details of your system. That way you can know what's going to go on. So if we have lettuce, we want to eat lettuce. You know, lettuce takes and grows better whenever it's cool. We can find cool areas in the shade on our property. So we can try growing slower, bulky, and heat-tolerant varieties in those areas. And that makes a good use of that plant's time. We can keep getting leaf greens. So that's a pattern that we're using for detail in our area. Integrate rather than segregate. Try to bring everything together. Try to keep things feeding back into one another. Keep the system working, almost like the water cycle. Small and slow solutions. You are less likely to screw something up whenever you keep it small and you implement it slowly. So start out with little pieces and work them together. So make sure that the first gear is turning before you start adding in all the little ones around the outside edge. Use and value diversity. Diversity is a wonderful thing in permaculture. It's a wonderful thing in general because the more diverse a system is, the more resilient it is. More stuff that can give you variety. Whenever we're planting a conventional garden, we usually try to use several different types of whatever plant we're wanting to put in. You try to plant them out at different times. That way they all come in at the same time. You diversify. You try to get as much stuff in there to make the system not crash as possible. Because you want to be resilient. And the more options you have, the more resilient you are. It's like money doesn't make you happy, but money definitely gives you options. Same thing in permaculture. Whenever you have that diversity, that's your money. Use edges and value the marginal. I'll come back in here and talk about edges here in a minute, but these are the spaces where several systems start interacting together and they can be very useful. Creatively use and respond to change. So if something happens, observe it. Why did it happen? How can I utilize this? How can I correct for it? How does that then fit into my system? And as we're going through all these things and you're trying to figure out how to implement this stuff, you just have some like orders of permanence you can work with. That way you can kind of know, get tripped all over yourself. You always want to start out with knowing your climate. So knowing what the environmental, what the weather conditions are in your area over time. Because that's going to be a huge limiting factor on what you can do, what happens in your area. Because that's going to be like rainfall, it's going to be what the temperatures are average, and on average. It can even be the legal and regulatory stuff that you'll wind up encountering. You have to know about those things because they're going to be the first big pressures on your systems. Your geography, so where are you? What's the ground like? What's your elevation? Where is all your wind and your rain? Water is life. It takes and it flows to the ground, the earth. It takes and keeps everything moving because nothing breaks down if there's not water present if you're trying to do compost. Nothing grows if there's no water to feed it, to give it the ability to make all those chemical reactions happen. Access, you do not want to put in a really big bed or really long line of woods, not have a way to get in there to do anything that you want to do. So always make sure you're designing your access in early in the system. Forestry, understand what's going on in the woods some. Work that into your conditions. What's going on in the woods around you? What's going on in your forests? How do they work? Your buildings, structures are big permanent things that we like to put up because they keep us dry and warm. And in the south, they also keep us cool. And these can be big catches for a lot of inputs. Rain, sun, storage. Fences, ways to take and make sure that stuff isn't getting where you don't want them to be. If you have a pretty little vegetable garden, the chickens can be quite the little home wreckers whenever they get in there because they scratch and they peck and everything. So you might have to exclude them out until you can move them in as part of your system. The economy, because you know we live in a world where everything moves by money, so we have to know how that's going to work. And even if we're talking about paper currency or government-backed money, there's also barter systems and trade. How are you going to take and get stuff that you need that you don't have on your own land? And then finally, energy. If you do everything properly, you don't have to have a lot of energy. Sometimes you create surpluses of energy that you can send out to other people. Systems, just for a definition of it, a set of connected parts that form a complex whole, set of principles and procedures according to which something is done. Another Bill Mollison quote, permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, a protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals and all their functions rather than treating any area as a single product system. So everything's tied together. So standard agricultural model looks a little something like this. We start out with a field, okay, and then we go buy some seed and we put it out on that field. Then we go get some fertilizer and put it out on that field. And then, you know, because we're doing a large monocrop, we have to bring in some herbicides and pesticides to keep everything under control in the field that we don't want growing. Now all that stuff, it'll take and run off with the rain, just frequently we over apply fertilizers, the nitrogen's not picked up by the plants before the water gets to it. And then we move on to harvest. So we got through all the summer, we're picking up the harvest. We take and we get some produce and we remove that from the land, and currently we frequently send that like thousands of miles away. Get some crop residue that may be pulled up if we're going wheat. You take and you get the straw, and that goes somewhere else completely. Because we're pulling all this stuff off the land, we're losing nutrient material. So then we'll give this farmer the benefit of the doubt and say that he likes doing cover cropping, which is a really good practice, and a lot of farmers do it now because it makes wonderful sense. This is a field planted in red clover, beautiful little plant. And that red clover takes and it adds nutrients to the soil. Now we get to spring, and that clover's sitting there, and we're ready to plant our corn. So how do we get rid of the clover? We take and we either till it in, which destroys the soil layer, or we take and we spray it down and kill it. So more herbicides. And then we're back to the field. And the next year we repeat this entire process. So what does the permaculture model look like? So we start out with that same field, but instead of leaving it as like one huge field, we break it into smaller fields that are a little bit easier to manage, that we can take and cordon off. We bring in some animals, because their manure can take and feed the soil, and big animals like cows, they can take and really stomp in that manure to the ground, work the soil up some. If we're doing a smaller scale system, chickens are great at scratching stuff into the ground and breaking stuff down and getting rid of things that you don't want there. Maybe we had to add some extra organic matter just to get everything kicked off right. We make sure we have a water management plan in place, because we can't get water there or hold water in the soil. We're going to wind up not being able to maintain our plants. And then we're being really forward-thinking. We're going to plant a polyculture crop. So this means we're going to plant several different crop plants together, or a crop with some sort of supporting plant. So the easiest one to think of is corn and beans. So we take and we plant corn, we plant beans in underneath the corn, take and provide nitrogen for it throughout the summer. It also helps add some extra shade cover to the ground, so we suppress some weeds. And then we get to harvest. So maybe our crops are reseeding, maybe they're not, maybe we're really ahead of the game. Having this polyculture in place gives us lots of diversity, and that diversity helps maintain, keep down pests of both the bug and plant variety. That diversity also takes and builds the soil biota. So all the organisms that live in the ground, the bacteria, the fungi, the earthworms, the little nematodes that don't kill your tomatoes, all that good stuff. And then we get to harvest. So we've got smaller fields, so we can use smaller equipment, which means we're having to use less fuel, hopefully. Or if they're small enough, we can even go in there and do it by hand with a scythe if we really wanted to. We take and we pull off a harvest for home because we're trying to feed ourselves in this model. Perhaps we produce enough that we can sell it off or give it out to other people. Maybe that secondary crop comes in and we take and we have another harvest we can do later. And of course we still produce a crop residue. So if we're doing wheat, we'll have straw. So then we get to fall/winter and we do another polyculture cover crop. Or maybe we planted some stuff previously that comes back up and reseeds itself. That crop residue, sometimes it's that polyculture support plant. Sometimes we leave it there on the ground to feed the soil back some more. And then we take, and because we're trying to make a system, we run animals back in here again. Because they can remove the cover crop for us. Because they can eat green wheat, they can eat alfalfa, they can take and eat bean leaves. It's not going to hurt them. They're going to add some manure. They're going to help compost the plants in. There we go. And then the crop residue, maybe it's left there for them to eat. Maybe we take that straw and use it as their bedding. And then finally, that stuff that we took home, we get to put that back in as organic matter on those fields. So we have this really nice circular system that once we really get going, we don't have to worry too much about having to bring in a lot of excess organic matter because we're reducing a lot of it. That soil is getting healthier, and the healthier that soil is, the healthier your plants are going to be, because you've got to feed the ground first. So permaculture systems, many inputs as possible accounted for and then monitored for needed change. They're resilient systems because they have a lot of redundancies in them. They're systems that can regenerate the land because they keep improving things because they produce a surplus that stays there. And they combine multiple systems to make a very complex whole. So now we're going to get to talk about the woods, because the forest is a great example of a permaculture system. The forest maintains itself. Who's ever seen someone outside watering the woods? No one has to worry about the desert. The desert more or less takes care of itself as long as we don't destroy it, right? No one has to worry about the prairie unless we're out there tilling it down into the soil. So what does a forest kind of do? Well, they're water traps. They can trap a lot of water in there, in the plants themselves, in the leaf and foliage material. The ground gets covered in really nice spongy stuff that holds lots of water. All sorts of good things. It's a giant water trap. That's why in the good woods you can dig down. It's always cool and a little moist underneath there unless we've had a really long dry spell, because there's lots of water stored in that soil. They're microbial harbors. Because of all that moisture that's there, because of that cover that the trees give in the shade, you don't have to worry about the microbes and the fungi and all the little guys in the soil being burned out or being dried out. They're always present. So it's a place we can go to pull our needed soil microbes if we want to. It's diverse. A natural wood doesn't have just one plant in it, right? There's always several different types of trees. There's a few different shrubs, even if the privet's gone crazy. There's vines growing here and there. There's a lot of different things in the woods. It's self-replicating. I mean, who's ever seen a field that no one does anything with just stay a field if it's near a wooded area? The forest always tries to produce more forest. This is called succession. Because you can even start as low down as a stream. If that stream slows up, you get a pond. That pond winds up filling in. You get a little meadow. Well, actually, usually you get a swamp. Then you get a meadow. And then that meadow has really good soil in there because it had pond soil in there. And that's like the greatest stuff ever to grow things in, next to worm castings. So then you start to get little pioneer trees growing in, things like locusts. Then eventually you have, in our area, poplars, or if there's close enough wood for the squirrels to do something with, they bring acorns. Cedars will show up everywhere because the birds love moving those guys around. They're a great little early successional species in our area. And the forest just makes more of the forest. And while the forest is making more plants and extending itself, it's also building that soil further. And it's self-sustaining. It'll keep itself running. Again, who's ever seen someone watering a forest? The forest takes care of itself as long as we don't screw with it. I mean, you can see in this picture that even though this is a really young woodland in the span of time, it's still a mature forest because there's not a lot of light getting down from the canopy. It's very sporadic, but there's still a lot of stuff growing in places. So there's a really good biome right here. So a forest provides. So there's a lot of dead wood in the forest. There's a lot of dead leaf material in the forest. This is fodder for fungi. They love sources like this. And that fungi, some of the most powerful ones in the fungal kingdom are the mycorrhizal fungi. These guys attach to plant roots. They find water, they find nutrient material, and they shove it back to plants. They take and they connect plants. Who here has not seen James Cameron's Avatar? Okay. So in there, on that world called Pandora, the entire world is connected through the roots of the trees. It's one giant network. In our world, the roots aren't connected to each other by roots. They're connected by a fungus. The largest organism on Earth right now is a giant mat of mycorrhizal fungi located in either Washington or Oregon. I can't remember right now, but it's underneath the giant forest up there. It's thousands and thousands of acres that fungus takes, and it connects all the trees and all the plants with the soil and each other over that entire range.
You can walk over it and know it's there.
And walk over it and not know it's there, because you'll never see it. And most of the time we don't recognize it because most of us don't know what the mushrooms for the various mycorrhizal fungi look like. Because the mushrooms are the fruiting cap whenever we're talking about fungus. All the real work that a fungus does is completely unseen in these little white hairs that run everywhere. And the mycorrhizal fungi, those suckers can run 3 foot a minute in the growing season.
Wow.
And they're hair thin. They will chase down a nematode and suck it dry in a minute. And these guys are the workhorses of the forest. They break down all the stuff that hits the ground. That's at least plant material, and they'll break down a lot of the organic, biological material, so dead animals, feces, deer poop feeds the forest too. The other thing that these guys do, though, besides finding water, is they store it. The hyphae, the fungal roots and hairs, they can actually swell up with water whenever it's available and hold that moisture there. So they act as their own reservoir along with the soil that they're building. So you get lots of moisture being present. And all that water that's there, all that deadfall material, all that animal waste, it all gets churned up by bacteria and fungi, and it gets turned into soil. Really good, loamy, earthy smelling soil that you can go practically anything in and give it a little work. Did you have a question for me?
No.
Okay. You can kind of see right here that tree stump, it's got fungus growing out of it. It's got some moss growing off of it. And if you've never gotten to see it, and I didn't put a slide in here, but sometimes you'll see a tree growing out of that dead stump, because it makes a great place to harbor a seedling. A forest is diverse, right? So in a forest, you always have 7 layers-ish. They're not all present, but most of them usually are. You have the canopy layer, which is your big trees. You have a lower tree layer, so the sub-canopy or the understory, okay? You're going to have a shrub layer. So plants are like my height or just a little bit bigger. They a lot of times provide browse for deer. They can provide fruits. It's really common in this layer for there to be like blueberries and blackberries and those kinds of things. There's usually a herbaceous layer. So little plants that come up, they're greenwood, then and as soon as the fall gets here and the frost hits them, they dive back down to the ground, leave all that plant material there to rot and feed them next year. You have a ground cover layer that keeps weeds suppressed. A lot of times your ground cover layer is weeds, as we normally think of them. This is stuff that kind of holds the soil there and protects it and keeps it from getting too hot. You have the rhizosphere, which is a really, really fancy word for root layer. So this is where all the plants are sitting. And then connecting everything, you have your fungal interaction in amongst all of it. And this teaches us that polyculture, that multi-plant system, is a natural state. It's how things want to be. Of course, we can design things in what's known as a guild. That's actually on your handout, the very first picture in there. These guilds are plants and trees, animals, insects that all work together to ensure the health and productivity of the system. Instead of planting gardens or orchards or fields or just single forests, we build guilds. We build groupings of plants because many things together make a very strong whole. There are several different things inside of the guild that you want to try to populate with. There is the food layer for us. That way we have something to eat. It also provides food for the animals in the area. There's food for the soil. So this is the material that feeds our ground, feeds our worms, keeps the plants happy, because they keep all the bacteria and fungi in the soil running good. It provides the nutrients for the plants for the next time. There are climbers, ground covers, diggers that take and they open up stuff from deeper in the earth. They break things apart. Sometimes these are going to be things like, in the case of the diggers, things like dandelions, daikon radish, mullein, which is a really cool weed plant. It's also known as Indian toilet paper because it can be used that way. And it can dig down through solid gravel and rock and bust it up. And what those plants do is whenever they do die back and their roots die, you have this nice reservoir of organic material there that lets water just kind of seep in and it starts building soil.
What do you call that?
Mullein?
Mullein?
Yeah, Mullein. That should at least get you close enough for finding it.
Verbascum is the scientific name.
Say again.
Verbascum.
Spell it.
Oh, okay. Verbascum.
C-O-N.
Ground covers, again, we're protecting the soil. We're kind of helping keep some of the weeds suppressed, the stuff that we don't really want to grow there. Supporters, plants that help out the other plants. So maybe this is some sort of leguminous tree. So a tree that fixes nitrogen, or a plant that fixes nitrogen, or something that grows really fast that we can do what's known as chop and drop to. That way, whenever we have periods of good heavy rain, we can go through, cut this green material back, just leave it laying where it hits the ground. And then that moisture and the biota of the soil starts breaking it down and turning it into plant food and mulch and just good ground cover that feeds everything later. Then you have protector plants. So these are plants that either like have natural insecticidal properties, they have natural fungicidal properties. They're plants that might be tall enough to provide a little bit of shade for some stuff that can't tolerate the heat as much. So there are lots of guilds already in nature, and you find a lot of the most diverse ones on the edge. So I talked about edges earlier being something that is valued in permaculture design principles. And at the edge of a wood, a lot of things happen. I mean, if anyone's driven down a highway in Tennessee, you see all the stuff that grows along the edge of those little strips of woods. Just a ton of things. I mean, this is very typical of what you'd see. Now, if we were going from the inside of mature wood, like a really old one, it's usually a lot less diverse, so there's still some going on. There may be several different tree species that are growing maturity in there, a few real good shade-tolerant shrubs and perennial plants.
And when a tree falls, then it kind of explodes.
Yep, because all that stuff's just sitting there waiting. Whenever a tree comes down, it opens up the canopy, and the next thing you know, you've got 8-foot tall red buds, you have sassafras everywhere, and suddenly the grass that was nowhere present pops up for the deer to come in and eat, at least here in Tennessee. So these edges, they're highly interactive. Lots of things happen here because we have several different systems meeting. There are multiple different species and multiple different habits crossing each other. I mentioned deer in Tennessee. We have whitetail. Whitetail is a species that needs woods for cover, needs fields for forage. So in Tennessee, if you've ever wondered why we have so many whitetail running everywhere now, it's because we made the perfect environment for them. Because we have lots of little wooded fence rows everywhere connecting lots of big fields with lots of stuff they like to eat. And they're usually best served where they cut deeply into each other. So instead of just having two interject like this runner here, run along the side like we see on the roadways, if they mesh real deeply into each other, like say there's a big windfall or a tornado came through and hit the edge of the woods, you'll get a lot of open spaces there that you can get some more prairie or marginal colonization going on. And these places can be really, really powerful. One to think of is like a pond edge, because at the edge of a pond, a lot of stuff goes on. There's lots of things that happen at the edge of a pond. You have stuff that lives in the water, you have stuff that lives in wet soil, you have stuff that lives in the surrounding area that comes there to drink the water. They're really awesome things. Now I'm going to play a trick on you. That's not an actual pond. That's a natural pool. That little edge right there, that edge is being used to filter the water in this pool. There's no standard filtration on this. This is all the plants and the biota that's found in this side over here and around the edges, keeping the water clean.
Is it pretty much sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep, it will just keep itself running as long as you don't do anything to throw it off.
You know, think of all the hours you spend on a regular pool.
Mm-hmm. And you put that in the ground, kind of baby it, make sure everything gets going the first year or two, and then it runs. That is a permaculture system. That is a very practical permaculture system, if you can dig in your soil. They're very popular over in England and Europe because you got deep ground over there you can actually do stuff in. There are places here in the States where you got deeper soil, but they work well. They're actually very popular in Texas. If I ever got a place where I could dig down that deep, I'd love to put one here.
Oh, dynamite.
Dynamite. And then, speaking of edges, the most common edge we get to deal with are patios and driveways. Think of all the stuff that constantly comes up in your patio and driveway. It's that edge. So zones. This is another one of those techniques / tools for permaculture. Everything's kind of layered out in areas. This is also goes along with, if you've ever heard me talk about vegetable gardening, I always tell you to put your vegetable garden as close to the house as you can so you can check on it regularly. That's because those plants require constant attention. You have to look over them regularly to make sure they're doing all right. So we start out with zone 00 here in the bullseye, which is us. Then we have zone 0, which is our homes. And then zone 1 is going to be our vegetable gardens, our chickens, all that good kind of stuff. Zone 2 is going to be something that's a little bit less intensive in management. So that might be some cows or sheep, might be some berry bushes. It could be a little food forest or orchard. Then zone 3 is going to be something we have to occasionally go out to see how it's doing, just to make sure it's still there. So that could be a more mature food forest. It could be an older orchard with some stuff that we only pull out every once in a while. Zone 4, if you have property for it, this is the spot where you go out and you get some like wild plants that have kind of shown themselves in there. We can get some food from that area. Maybe we have our coppice trees out there, which are trees that you cut flat and then let them grow poles up again for firewood. You'll also find some trees that are self-seeded in there. This is a good area that maybe something's come up. Maybe this is a good tree that you want to use back in your zone 2 and back in your zone 3, or maybe even your zone 1. You can dig it up and move it. And then you have zone 5, which is your natural wild areas. This is the place where all the things that you're trying to encourage to come from. It's like we have frogs. They live on the ground here in Tennessee. We have tree frogs, we have toads. Those guys, they eat a lot of pest bugs that we don't want in our garden. So if you have a good environment for them outside of your area, and you have a decent environment for them inside where they can kind of set up shop, so we make some areas where they can live at comfortably, they can come in and start making sure that you layer out the property and how you access it and use it. That way you're moving in between areas in a way that's effective for you, so you're not having to expend excess energy. Now, a lot of people, whenever they see the zone system and they see the bullseye, they get hung up on it. Don't get hung up on the bullseye, okay? The zones can be whatever you need to. So right here we have home, okay? We have zones for the home. So here we have the house with the greenhouse, some water storage, and that's our zone 1. And then we have a zone 2. It's got this really weird shape to it because it runs up to the parents' house. Guess where we sometimes go visit? We go to visit the parents. So we put our zone 2 stuff along that line. And we can check on that stuff while we're going in between the parents' house. The zone 3, heading out towards the road, the woods in the back the kids might play. We have that stuff there. Zone 4 is our way around the outside edge here. This is a little strip of area where like the plants are being successional. You have the forest trying to move into the grassland. And then zone 5, this is where the deer live. This is where all the squirrels take and set up shop whenever you run them off your property. That's where the occasional weasel comes from to pluck the chickens out of the coops. But that's all stuff you can work with. So don't get hung up on the zone bullseye. Just keep in mind that these things exist. Like for me, in my new home, I'm going to take and put an herb garden right at the driveway in that little spot between the sidewalk and the house that everyone likes to put in there when they're building places that you normally can't do anything with. That'll be a nice little heat sink area where I can grow all sorts of little herbs with no trouble, and I'm going to walk past that twice a day. So I can get herbs as I'm going out, I can get herbs as I'm coming in to cook supper. So now we're going to talk about the first big thing in permaculture as far as stuff we're building, and this is swivels. This is our water capturing system. Okay, we're going to store water where it's needed with a swale, because a swale is used to mimic the water collecting and holding abilities of the forest floor and its mulch. All right. It's a reforesting system. It slows and prevents erosion. It's going to collect soil. It's going to have a high moisture microclimates right behind it. And that's what one looks like. That's what one looks like dry. If you're going, that kind of looks like a weird ditch. That's because it is. A swale is a flat ditch that runs along the contour or the same height across the landscape. You take and you have a flat area where the water collects. You pile that soil you dug up from there to make a little berm. That water rushes, comes down across the landscape, builds up there against that berm. And then it just sits there and it soaks into the ground. And underneath, there's one filled up. I'll get back to this one over here in a second. Underneath, you start getting water buildup underneath that berm as that water soaks in. So you wind up with this reservoir of moisture here. We take and we put plants on that berm. We plant trees on that berm. They dig in. They hold water themselves. They give an area for that fungal mat to show up so it can hold moisture and hold everything together. It starts digging deeper into the soil below. That water loosens up the ground there. It gives places for the roots to run to. That way it can get deeper. If anyone's ever heard of a rain garden, this is like a rain garden. Except this is a rain garden across an entire area. Okay? Now with swales, this is what is kind of known as a permaculture or a harvesting swale, because we just want the water to sit there and soak in. Okay? It's built on level. We try not to do this on a grade above 10% because that can lead to some mudslide type issues where the ground holds too much moisture. Make sure you plant trees in there because it is a reforesting system. Trees are an integral part of a good swale system because they're going to hold everything in place. They're going to soak up water so you don't come up with a bog. It has a very important thing called a sill that is a level overflow. But before I move on to explain that a little bit more, one other thing about all this water that develops underneath the swale, eventually that makes really big water lenses underneath the ground, where there's a lot of water sitting there just underneath the soil, just kind of held in place. Eventually that'll hit the water table, and then real eventually, sometimes real quickly, depending on your ground, you can even wind up making a spring downhill because there's so much. So the sill. So right here is a sill. That is a perfectly flat spot at the maximum height you want to keep the water in your swale. Okay. Again, it's as wide as you can make it. A lot of places will take and try to do it between 1 meter and 3 meters, depending on what spacing they got. They're dead level. I mean absolute dead level. And they're heavily compacted because we don't want this soil to move. These folks even went to the extent of putting rocks in there to make sure that soil doesn't move. So if you do it all right, it also meets the downhill slope so that you control the energy of the water as it overflows as much as possible. and it directs that water flow down into the next swell or the next system for water harvesting and moving. So if you do it right, it looks like this. We have a swell, it's filled up with water, and it's very gently just pouring over the edge. Dogs sitting there all nice and happy. You can see the grass that's grown into the swell just kind of sitting there, and it's okay. It's not completely bundled over, the soil's not moving. That's a good swell. I mean, that's a good seal on a good swell. This is not a good seal. That seal was not properly compacted, it was not on the right level, and it just overflowed and it failed. Now, if you start building your own swell systems, you might have this happen a time or two. Good news about this is that hopefully you don't get one of these huge rain events. And this guy actually has an entire farmer's field draining onto his property, just like 20 feet back up from the swell. So there's lots of water that comes down here. So he wound up getting a really good rain event that showed him exactly what he did not do right. Mother Nature is a really good teacher. So other soil reservoirs, you have a diversion swell. So this is again 1% slope or less, and this moves water very slowly from point A to point B with little to no infiltration. Then you have bioswale, again very low slope. It's planted and mulched because this is intended to take and infiltrate water and capture pollutants. Okay, and it can still take and move water from A to B, but this is water that we need to kind of clean up first.
What are those lines in that drawing? Are those put on there, or are those?
Yeah, the yellow lines are the contour of the ground.
Okay, they're added.
Yeah, and then the blue line is how the water flows. And then of course you have rain gardens. These are depressions. They're very well planted. We have 2 of them out here on the property. They absorb storm water so it doesn't run off into our stormwater system, so it doesn't flood out, you know, everything into our nearest creek, stream, or river. They improve water quality that way because much like a bioswale, they'll capture contaminants. They keep that water from being able to get out and find contaminants. And then finally, we have ye old pond. It's a really great way to hold water because you can hold a lot of water in one spot. It makes it very available to animals and people. It creates a lot of habitat that you can use for stuff. And this is all part of a water harvesting system on property. And you can use as little or as much of it as you need to for whatever you're trying to accomplish. So what does this kind of all look like together? It can look like this.
Oh,
This is a really pretty system of swales and diversion swales. There's even a rain garden in there. You can see here on the plan, we have a downspout here that takes and feeds into a little diversion area that gets it away from the house, fills in 2 different swell systems, has an overflow into a rain garden that then has an overflow out into the yard. So all the water that hits that house goes to support, on this side, goes to support these plantings, and that's what it's looked like while they're putting it together. So you can make some really pretty and convoluted systems out of this stuff. And those plants, most of that is either cooking herbs, pollinator plants, or a crud ton of strawberries.
yeah, is that Tennessee?
That is not, this is actually in Ohio.
So can you put something like that where you can only get this deep?
Definitely. You just have to take and do what you can to get that water moving back and forth as slowly as possible to soak in. And you can also take and build up the soil there if you don't have enough sitting in the site to where you have those berms. That way you have a way to capture that water and not let it move off till you want it to.
Your builder's not going to do it for you.
No. They'll probably create some problems you have to fix to do it.
That's where I'm at. But I don't have any tops.
Yeah. I've got a solution for that here in a few slides. This website, by the way, is 10th Acre Farm. This lady's practicing permaculture on 1/10 of an acre. She provides a little over half of her food needs on this property. So sheet mulching, this is your solution. Okay, so this is what sheet mulching looks like from the top. Looks like a whole bunch of straw just matted down there. There's actually a picture in here on the next to last page that shows a slide a picture I'll have for a second. So sheet mulching is a gardening technique that suppresses weeds and simultaneously builds fertile soil. It is thick layers, and I mean thick layers of organic material that are placed on the ground in the lasagna garden type. So you can even take the plant into your sheet mulch and get them above your cruddy soil or your non-existent soil. And then this is the picture that's in there. So we start out with our soil layer, where our roots and our cracks and some soil that we moistened before we did all this work to first. We've slashed or mowed down the vegetation real low. Then we add some soil amendments that we need to, because we need to add them. And then we put down a 1/2 inch or better layer of newspaper and cardboard that overlaps really, really well. And this is our sheet. That cardboard newspaper layer provides weed suppression and weed seed smothering, and helps kind of hold moisture down because it deters evaporation.
Now, we've done that around the little landscape plants that the builder put out there, and then put mulch on top of it, because I don't like that plastic junk.
Yep.
And so we did it for weed suppression, and around the house where we've done that, it's really good.
Because it's trapping a lot of moisture in there, and as that stuff breaks down, it introduces humic acid and carbon to the soil, which makes the soil better. And now we get to the soil building part though, the sheet mulching. Then you put 8 to 12 inches of hay or stable bedding or some other big organic bulk amount. Then on top of that, you put about 4 inches of manure or some other nitrogen-rich material, maybe just some good compost. And then you put in some really well-aged compost, some stuff that you've had for a while that looks more like what you think of as soil. And then finally you go through and you put a good layer of mulch down, about 2 inches at least. This gives you this really nice, thick bed of organic material that your plants can pull nutrients and water from. It'll hold moisture, and as all that stuff breaks down, it'll help improve the soil underneath, and it'll actually give you a soil layer.
So you don't have to haul in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of soil.
Right, you can just take and start gathering up everyone's food scraps. So now here's a fun one, hugelkultur. This is a great tool in permaculture. Hugelkultur means high culture. It's called high culture because this is what a hugelkultur bed looks like. A good hugelkultur bed should be tall enough that you can put your arm out and you're picking off the top. So in my case, we're talking about 5.5 feet tall. So what's different about this from other things? Well, hugelkultur is a wood core bed system. It provides a lot of that same stuff that we get from woods, because you know trees growing on old stumps, breaking down, building soil layers. So it makes for microbial habitat because it's a big mound of soil and also wood core in the center. It holds a lot of heat. Holds a lot of moisture in there because that wood will soak up water. That wood will also give a harbor for fungi, which in the center area is not getting as much wind exposure as what's on the outside edge. So you have places where it's not getting beaten to death as much. So you get more moisture trapped in there. So it kind of keeps feeding itself. That can also create heat pockets, which will help keep you from having to worry about frost as much.
Now, is that chips? What is that?
Let me get down here. So this is what a hugelkultur bed looks like. You take and you stack up logs, so older and new wood together, and as you get closer to the top, you get smaller and you get more broken down. And as you're adding all this wood, you're mixing in a little bit of organic material that's really high in nitrogen, so manure, fairly fresh compost.
How do you make it stick together?
Well, that's the great thing. We have clay in Tennessee.
We do have clay, yes.
And that's a really good way to kind of hold everything together. As you add the organic material in there and you wet everything down, it'll kind of take and settle and hold and latch. Because if you've ever seen a deadfall in the woods where several trees have come down together, you're not moving that stuff easily, and that's what we're kind of making here. And just kind of keep building it up, covering it with more organic material, leaves, fresh cut grass, which is really high in nitrogen. And then finally you take and you cover it in soil and compost that's fairly fresh, and you start planting into it. Some of the best woods to use for this are going to be alder, apple, cottonwood, poplar, dry willow. Don't use wet willow, you'll have trees. Birch. Here in Tennessee we have a lot of maple, it'll be a good wood for it. Avoid.
Pine doesn't work so good.
No, it doesn't break down real fast.
Cedar is really terrible.
Yeah, you want a wood that's going to have a lot of moisture, that's going to actually rot. You don't want to put it in there and have it sit for a century, which I've seen many cedar posts do exactly that. So how does it look year to year? So the first year we build it, got all that nice wood in there. It's absorbing water, it's absorbing nitrogen, it's holding everything there, it's building up. You may not get a lot of good growth out of your kugel bed that first year, but wait for it, it's charging its system. So the next year, you start getting some other stuff growing in there, the roots are starting to penetrate in there, your mycorrhizal fungi are showing up, your bacteria is going in there and breaking stuff down, and that wood is starting to deteriorate and get busted up and turned into soil. Year 3, things are really getting a little bit sparser in there, a lot more root systems. It's holding a lot of moisture. You can probably take and have one of these survive a Tennessee drought through the summer, as long as it's not getting too much wind baked onto it. And then finally, many years out, all that wood is deteriorated. It's a nice little humic layer inside of that mound. The mound's probably shrunk a little bit. You got stuff growing all over the place. The roots are down deep in there. There is an absolutely massive amount of fungi just holding water and nutrients. And then we start doing some sheet mulching over top, make sure we kind of keep that nutrient flow in there. We have plants planted in there that feed the system back in. And we just kind of keep circulating all that nutrient material back in that one spot.
Do you always plant a tree?
No, but nature usually does. Remember how I talked
And you
about...
don't tear it out and leave it there?
Preferably, if it's not causing a problem and it wants to be there, go ahead and leave it, because there's a reason. Because everything wants to go back to that forest system. So whether you want those 7 layers or not, they will show up. So the more you can account for it, the easier your life will be. So wood core beds, this is another name for hugelculture. This type of bed though is usually very low. This is a good one for our area and also for your neighbors, so they don't look at you funny or call the HOA on you. Because you can take and put that wood down through, you can wet it real nicely, throw some compost over top of it, throw some soil back in over top. Uses smaller pieces of wood branching, and it gives you all the benefits of a hugelculture bed, just not the amount of water storage, because you're still going to build up a good soil layer. Seed mixes, little picture down there. So a good seed mix is used to produce a cover crop for your ground, to build your soil layers, to maybe do some cropping, insect attractants, butterflies, hummingbirds, predatory insects like ladybugs, feed, erosion control. There's a lot of stuff that can go into a seed mix. That's like the scratching the surface. A lot of good seed mixes will contain nitrogen fixers, so plants that encourage nitrogen in the soil. A lot of times we think beans when we think of that, but there's a page on the back of the second page of the handout with a long list of nitrogen fixing plants. This includes everything from little brown cover weeds all the way up to black locust. They'll all take and put nitrogen into the soil and help build up that soil layer. There's even indigo on here, Baptisia, blue false indigo. It over time can produce nitrogen in the soil. These seed mixes, they can be very, very useful for improving an area. That little picture, so this area right here, where this guy moved in to this place, it was yellow rock. He went through, he ran some chickens, he threw out a seed mix. 52 days later, that's what he had. He started in late April, early March, and by the end of May going into June, he had what looks like a little wildflower pasture. So whenever you're putting together a seed mix for any use in permaculture, keep in mind what you're wanting to use it for, because that's going to affect what you put in there. If you need your ground tilled up, put in things that dig, like turnips and borage, that daikon radish I mentioned earlier. If you need to add nutrients, there are different plants that pull out of the soil and down deeply in different amounts. Anyone here ever heard of comfrey?
Yeah.
Comfrey is a leafy, herbaceous plant. The leaves break down really, really fast. It digs deep. It provides a lot of potassium for the soil, which encourages bud production, which is why comfrey is usually planted in with fruit trees, because it's good, that potassium helps them put on fruit. Mob grazing, this is a cool little thing to do, because what happens is you take and you run a large number of some sort of livestock through a small area for a very short period. Them running through, and you can do it with cows, chickens, even rabbits, they do good for mob grazing. And they go through and they eat the plants that are there, they kind of work stuff in. Chickens really work stuff in, cows crunch stuff in, rabbits just make awesome fertilizer. And as they're doing this, and they're doing it really quickly, just through spacing, it's going to improve the soil. Improving that soil will improve the forage for the animals. And it can prep the ground for a new use. Running chickens through an area strips out all the seeds and works in good organic material. So then you can run in and put your own plants. And you don't have to worry about overly competing with weed seeds, because chickens will eat anything that hits the ground almost. They're not very selective. Food forests. Now we're circled back to a forest. It's a garden that's primarily or entirely perennial polycultures. It's going to contain at least 3 of those layers that we talked about, so you can actually see differentiation in height in there. It's going to be fairly low maintenance. It's going to be based on a woodland system, okay? It's going to incorporate fruit and nut trees, shrubs that produce berries, herbs that are useful for cooking or eating or protecting plants, vines that can make fruit for you, or just kind of fill in space. Beans work really well in these systems. Perennial vegetables, things like asparagus, Jerusalem artichoke, support species that protect other plants and help them produce the what they need to. So you can see all 7 layers in this little example. So there are several different types of forest. You have a savanna type, like this right here, that's an oak prairie savanna. That's going to be very open. It's going to be alley cropping, so you can run animals or do cropping in between the trees down through there. This is what we talk about in agroforestry. You have an orchard. You have regularly spaced trees. They're going to be alternating guilds of planting, so they kind of help each other. This is really good if you're trying to do large-scale production. There will be like a lot of annual vegetables and herbs planted amongst them because they get plenty of sunlight. And then finally we move into the woodland system. So that early successional stage of forest where you have some fairly tall trees, but there's not tons of shade on the ground yet. You have lots of little glen spaces. That's the most diverse of all of these. You're going to have a lot of mixed plantings in there. Most of them are going to be perennial. Some of them are going to be annuals. There's going to be lots of shady spots to protect various plants and just make it easier for you to work outside. This is what in a smaller home area you're kind of shooting for, because the orchard and the savanna systems, those are better for larger properties. And then of course you have your closed canopy, your mature forest. This is your in succession stage. This is what they call a climax in a forest. It's going to be heavily shaded. There's going to be almost nothing but perennials in there. This is going to be what, if you walked out into our woods, you'd see out there. A food forest isn't planted in straight rows. This is a traditional orchard, all the nice grass that you can see there. There's going to be several different rows of trees, so a permaculture orchard is not necessarily a food forest, okay? There's not a single layer, there's all sorts of different layers in there. It's going to be underplanted, but not with only angles. There's going to be lots of different things underneath there, and it's not really dependent on outside inputs. A standard orchard, you have to go in there and fertilize, you have to go in there and spray, you have to go in there and do all sorts of stuff besides just pick the plants. In a food forest, you just want to go in there and get your food and then go back out. You just kind of walk through and it's like, oh look, that apple's ripe, and here's some berries, and oh, I can make a fruit salad. So this right here is that savanna system where you've got chickens running in between the trees. So they're adding their compost in there, they're picking out insects and stuff that we don't want there. They're scratching all the ground up and working in lots of manure to make compost. And here's a picture, very blurry, of a more mature food forest. You can take that there's several trees that have got some canopy cover in there that create little spots of shade, and there's open spaces for other things. So whenever we do this right, we get high productivity, we get naturally occurring mulch because the plants are shedding leaves and dead wood. If we're doing chop and drop through there, we're putting down more organic material, which feeds the plants, which provides fertilizer, and also provides mulching material. We're getting natural pest control because we have that guild system, so we have plants that encourage pest predators coming in. We have plants that discourage different pests that are present. And because it's a whole bunch of different things, we got a lot of resiliency built in. So if we have a late frost and the apple trees don't do their thing, we have some blueberries mixed in there that you can pick the fruit off of. Or we have some plums that come out a little bit later. We can do many different cultivars of a single type of plant, a fruit variety. Whenever we're planting these out, we're going to try to avoid a few things. We're going to avoid overplanting. We don't want to shove everything and its cousin into one space. That makes a mess. That doesn't make a food forest. Improper spacing, give everybody room or just enough room. So that mature width that the plant's going to get to, if you're going to just pay no attention to it and let it get there, take that into account. Otherwise, plan on having to occasionally go in there and nip stuff back. So right plant, right place. We're not going to neglect the soil, we're going to build the soil, we're going to put these systems in, we're going to do swelling, we're going to do sheet mulching, we're going to build the ground up. We're going to make sure we make good selections for our area, make sure we're getting plants that are the size we need, make sure that we're getting plants that are going to survive in our area. And we're going to make sure that we're prepared both for doing all the work to set it up and for getting in and out. We have to have a way to get in and out, so we need trails and access, so don't forget about that. Backyard food forests, real nice little simple one right here. Some apple trees, a handful of peaches, blackberries, blueberry plants. They're all kind of filling in their little bits of layers. Gomi bushes, gomi berries are supposed to be really good for you. It's also a nitrogen fixer. Then you'll have a mix of herbs, flowers, and vegetables. This is your herbaceous layer. Well, you might get bears. Beans and cucumbers, this is going to be your vine layer, your ground cover, your rhizosphere. There's a really cool plant called ground nut that it produces this little tuber in the soil that you can eat. And it's also a vining plant. So you cover both the rhizosphere and the vertical sphere, and you get something that's edible. So that's a really cool thing. Lots of fresh seasonings provided in these things. They're a good example of permaculture. Things to keep in mind whenever you're doing one of these. Make sure you've got good sun exposure. Most herbs need good sun. And since you're building it tall in a spiral, you'll have a shadier spot on the north side, and down lower it'll be more moist. So if you've got stuff that needs protection, you can plant it on that north side down low. If you need something that stays real dry, you can plant it up higher in the top. Stone and brick are probably the best materials because they'll hold the most heat and be the most stable when you stack them and start filling with soil. Be sure to mulch. Mulching is the next best thing you can do, making sure that you have good water and good soil. Because the more mulch you have, it's breaking down, and the more moist that soil will stay, the more life will be present.